I'm delighted to have as our guest today Anne McDonald, who has been my colleague in the College of Arts, Media, and Design for a long time. Anne is a designer and associate professor in the Department of Art and Design at Northeastern. She studied at the Institute of Design in Chicago and then earned a BFA from the University of Washington in Seattle. Subsequently, she received an MFA in graphic design from Yale and continued postgraduate studies in the Master of Environmental Design program in the School of Architecture at Yale University, further explaining why we get along very well. Prior to joining academia, she worked as a professional designer for a number of years at firms such as NBBJ Architects in Seattle, Daroff Design, Interior Designers, and Cloud and Geshen Associates, environmental graphic designers, both in Philadelphia, and Jeff Kennedy Associates, museum planning and exhibit designers in Somerville, Mass. As a member of interdisciplinary teams, she has observed and anticipated human behavior in design of user-centered architectural sign systems for urban campuses, institutional buildings, and civic sites. She has designed sign systems that provide wayfinding assistance, humanize the built environment, and create a sense of place. Building on her experience providing orientation, navigation, and contextual information in three-dimensional environments, she has created numerous screen-based dynamic user interfaces and experiences with colleagues across the university and beyond. Her research and project-based inquiries investigate the potential for increased engagement, meaningful correlation, and learning offered by dynamic information systems. Exhibit and interaction design work for the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the New England Aquarium, the National Health Sciences Consortium, and the American Society of Plant Biology have offered wide audiences access to complex topics. Ongoing projects in academic planning and environmental science areas explore the potential of interactive and participatory information systems to assist individuals and communities in better linking their everyday decision-making to broader social impacts and consequences. Please join me in welcoming Anne McDonald.
Okay. Welcome. George, thank you for inviting me here. I know it's a beautiful day out there, and sometimes the digital world isn't as exciting as the physical world, and today I'd say that is true. I'd much rather be out there as well. I'm going to talk about shifting frames, and I think as being the way this course is structured, as I understand it, it's often about giving you different frames and understanding about design through multiple perspectives. I'm a designer and an educator, as George had said, which to me, again, in design, I'm a visual communicator, and I think of being an educator as being a facilitator and a performer. My area of specialty is UI and UX design, or design for interaction and participation. So UI being user interface and UX being user experience. So you've probably heard those terms a lot more since you've probably each downloaded many, many apps. All of those are dependent on UI and UX design. So I want to talk a little bit about questioning as a similar way. It is a method of framing. For whom? To what end? No designer can operate without asking these questions, in my opinion, or operate successfully. In what context? In relation to whom? What do we mean? How do we call that? So I've spent a lot more time recently with nomenclature. So not writing paragraphs of text, but really getting into what do we call that? What do we mean when we put those words against that concept? I'm teaching a course this term for freshmen in the Department of Art and Design called Design, Process, Context, and Systems. Probably one too many words in that title, but most of the students there are intended to study graphic design. So we started with a film by Gary Hustwit, a documentary about Helvetica. So how many people here have seen that film? So a number of you. It's on Netflix, anybody? So when you're bored, go watch it. And he has two other films, Objectified and Urbanized, I believe is his other one. So the Helvetica film is more than just about a typeface. So everyone here probably is familiar with Helvetica in that it's on drop-down menus in most except for if you use Arial. But it's in a very accessible font that's ubiquitous everywhere. And what was interesting about that frame is that's the comfort frame for most graphic designers or visual communicators, is the individual letter, the letter form as it meets a whole series of other letter forms in terms of a system. Sorry, I'm turning on my clock here so I don't go too long. And I think the frame that we go to very quickly when you watch the films, it's not really just about the typeface. It's about design, it's about culture, it's about branding, it's about change, and about how expressions can still be made using one font, or with some of the people being interviewed in the film or not. So as soon as we move past just the letter or the individual sign, we're moving into a system. So the New York subway system is much more than just a map or a sign. It's the sum of all those parts, so we're changing frames. As we move to looking at the physical and comparing it to the actual lived experience, so the physical representation of a sign versus the actual behavior, to me that's when things really get interesting. And I think that change of frame is addressed in Helvetica to some degree, but even more so in the work of Charles and Ray Eames. So how many people here have seen Powers of 10, that short film? That's even, oh good, some. That's online. Again, you don't even have to go to Netflix. You don't even have to have a Netflix account. And the reason I brought the Eames in is because they have a broad practice. There's a film out called, on PBS, Masterpiece Series, I think, on the architect and the artist, I believe, and it's about their practice. And for the people that in my class that had already seen Helvetica, I had to think, well, what are they going to watch? So they watched that, and it's really about the design process and about how these individuals and their firm really were more than artists and architects. They also were really seminal in the modern art and design for furniture in terms of the Eames chair being bent plywood, innovation in technology, but also in exhibit design and in film, short films. And one of the short films that they did do, first released in '68 and then in '77 for IBM, was about this shifting of frames. And again, it's through the powers of 10, so you start with this couple lying on a beach blanket in Chicago. And again, it's a really seminal film in the space of design, so you definitely should see it if you're thinking about pursuing design further. It doesn't take long, but they zoom all the way out into the past our galaxy in powers of 10, and then zoom back down through the skin down to the level of a DNA molecule. And that seems really simple now, and it seems so pervasive now because of, I should be doing this presentation in Prezi, or because of our ability with technology to really shift scales and shift that frame quickly. But at the time they did it, these were not easy things to achieve, and it really does feel like you're moving through many different perspectives. So that changing of frames or lenses is, to me, a seminal part of any type of design, that ability to look at things from multiple people's point of view. So I'm sure with different people that have spoken here already, you might have heard we need to look at the expert user, the novice user, the extreme user of something. We need to look at the visitor versus the person who uses a building every single day. So those contrasts, that understanding of your audience through these various frames can really help you solve the problem that's put in front of you, or even to seek a problem that you want to address as a designer much more fruitfully. So you guys are already living this story that's on the screen here, and that it's really Northeastern story at this point. You guys are the individual sources. You're going to be the amazing people out there and leading in your fields, but we really have to think about the local and then the relationship between the local and the global. So that is the story that we are often thinking about in terms of the objects that we design as well. I've always been somewhat interested in, even when I was young, the difference between, or the relationships between people, systems, environs, and then the impact that those relationships can have. Initially, I'm going to give you a little bit of personal history here. I really thought industrial engineering, that's what I want to do, but I wasn't so sure, and one of my art teachers was like, no, don't do that. Go back to the people and tell them you want to be a designer too. Take some classes in design as well, which was lucky for me. But I still think the core of people and systems, even in my naive version, cliche version of what industrial engineering was, is core to what I'm really interested in and what I do every day. So obviously, since I'm a little older than most of you, this has been your reality. But for me, these changes have really shifted the way that I practice design and the way that all of us practice design, from globalization through geopolitical power shifts, environmental disconnect, technological innovation, hugely the ubiquitous networked computing that we all have access to, and locative technologies. And I'll talk about the second column a little bit further when we get to customization and participatory culture. But I think one quote from Charles Eames, again, I don't know the exact time that he said this, but I feel that this is really true. We're beyond the age of information is the age of choices. So we are, in my opinion, living in this age of choices. He was already anticipating that. I'm assuming this was sometime from the 70s. So I think of myself as a designer, as a curator of systems of possibilities. If I was now considering industrial engineering or design, I might be thinking more along the lines of this Harley-Davidson ad, or the ability to customize my bike, to go online, have an interface, decide what I want, and then have it delivered to me. And that's true in the car industry as well. And I know there was Richard Saul Werman spoke with Moshe Safdie a few weeks ago, and they were lamenting the fact that it's not quite there in the housing industry at this point, this idea that you can really have well-crafted, customized things that a layperson can order up. So I create systems or frameworks that offer others the ability to visualize, create, connect, and hopefully learn. My work embraces fluidity and is human-centered. So I really think process is the thing you're probably hearing from everybody, but this is actually, I can't believe I actually got my kids in this presentation, but this drawing that they made is one of my absolute favorites, and it's not because of the artifact, though I do love the artifact. It was about process. They were working on this with friends, so they kept taping new pieces of paper to it, and it was about sound effects, and it was some sort of kill, die, 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 kill thing where they kept growing it, and it was all about the process of whatever it was they were imagining in this world, and they didn't really care about the drawing. And I think that's really evidenced by the fact they have masking tape in pink on it. They didn't care. They were like passionate in the middle of their process. They just kept going. So that play and collaborate is really important in terms of the way we practice design. So being humble enough to stop, listen, and observe, I think is key. Empathize. So I know you've heard this probably from everybody here. I grew up with a brother who couldn't really talk, walk, communicate at all. So I spent my first 8 years of my life trying to figure out, what is that person thinking? What are they feeling? What are they experiencing? I also have a lot of siblings, so I couldn't do anything if I couldn't get everybody lined up, headed where I wanted. So that idea of building consensus and finding out what do you need to do to build that consensus is really key to all design. The idea of nurturing or touching people obviously comes across in education, but I think it's true of really being kind to the end users who you're designing for. Not because you're trying to make money, but what do they need? What can make their lives different, better, more delightful, whatever the criteria are. Again, I think we are definitely back in this sort of make and mod culture, but I grew up in that space of loving the systems of sewing where you get a pattern, and it was basically a beginning point, and I could mod from there. I could get different fabric, I could make it shorter, make it longer, do whatever I wanted. I could build a loom. I built this great tabletop loom, but I never wove anything on it. I didn't even care about weaving. My sister, luckily, was a fiber artist, so she picked it up, but I just wanted to make the tool that other people can make with. That really interests me. I really feel like designers, I can tell a freshman graphic design student when they come to me with their whole 5-year plan plotted out 3 different ways, trying to look at the patterns and trying to analyze and be strategic about which term should they do this summer. That, maybe architecture students do that too, George, but it's definitely not the art students in my department. It's the graphic design students are right there with the whole plan. So we connect and we translate. We're often working from an expert point of view, and they're trying to communicate something to a general audience, and they are the expert. They know what they know, but they cannot get it to a level that's understandable for other people without the help of a designer, a writer, and people that help translate and connect their ideas to another group or another audience who has no idea what they're talking about. I really feel very strongly that design is, the way I practice it at least, is this invisibly held together structure, not the shiny boat pieces or plane pieces here that someone's going to punch out, but that whole structure that sits there invisibly, might even be thrown in the trash later, no one even knows it existed. To me, that's the core part of design that I enjoy. And I didn't start there loving that part. When I started working for NBBJ Architects, I was working in sign design, and I was like pretty frustrated pretty quickly because we weren't making these wonderful, formal, expressive things that I'd hoped for. I thought sign design or wayfinding is 95% administrative and 5% design. I didn't realize at that point that design was all the things I was doing, where I was going out and interviewing people in hospitals, trying to figure out how they behave, try to understand how we should number the rooms, what sizes, where are the decision points. That didn't seem like design to me. The logo in the corner maybe for NOAA, that seemed like design, but not all this other relationships and shifting frames and caring about humans. But I will say that I did have a project right out of school, which was really impressed me in that upon me how much I've got to figure out where people aren't going to tell me. It was a NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, had a new campus on the water on Lake Washington in Seattle, and they had an identity standard. So it was a system that would tell everyone how to apply their work to signs. And I realized after looking at the 2 pages for hours, this isn't going to tell me how to design what I need to design. So I needed to extend or riff on their system in order to make a more complete system, to make a whole series of different directional and identification signs for this campus. I didn't know how big things should be. That's always very deceptive. If you take a stoplight down and you put it on the ground, the scale of it is much larger than you would anticipate it to be. So I got to make mock-ups and drive by them. So that iterating, testing, and you can make good judgments if you can see things where they're going to be used. Watch people behave with them. Having to sit in your little tiny office and speculate, that's tough. So the shifting of scale, again, is something I love about visual communication, where I might be designing very, very small type on a business card one day and 20-foot letters in a convention center the next day. That shift, I think, is a lot of what I found interesting about graphic design, and I think with the responsive technologies we have now, where mobile first, you need to deliver that website on a PC, a tablet of every which size, as well as a smartphone. To me, that's really exciting. But for some designers who really want to control everything, that's a tough thing to do. But I think that's great. So again, that connection, that sense-making, that's the piece that we bring. And I feel like designers in some ways can't work unless we're working with someone else. At least graphic designers are visual communicators. We need, oops, that was me, right? We need to collaborate and work in interdisciplinary teams. I'm going to switch a little bit to the built environment. I spent a lot of time looking at, because I don't design sign systems too much anymore, but I look a lot at what's out there, and there's a lot of things in history where we try to understand how collectively we can understand our individual decisions in relation to the group. So there's not many examples of information visualization out in physical space from long ago. Many more now because we have locative technologies, sensors, walls that can gather your data and display them as you walk by, or the cumulative data. But I do think this sense of coming together and experiencing information as we walk through it still has some resonance. So this is an exhibit that I designed long ago with a group of people about women's health, and it traveled to science museums in this country and Europe for 10 years, and I kept thinking, that's so dead and old. And what was interesting is the information, the content of it actually did change. There was a whole thing about hormonal treatment in menopause that changed considerably during the 10 years this traveled. But I think because the exhibit really had a lot of narrative and stories in it, and that science was secondary, that it was able to be updated and be changed, as well as to be shipped into trucks and sent away. And those are a lot of challenges. So those constraints of trying to make things, and it would go into different shaped rooms too. So to design things that are constantly fluid that way, I think is a challenge, but also a real exciting challenge. So I'll just click through these. And usually there's some manipulables or some interaction that people are doing in a lot of these exhibits. I then moved to much more screen-based work, and I'm going to kind of whip through this pretty quickly. But again, the idea that there was at the aquarium, there was a show on amazing jellies. How could we make an online learning experience, which instead of having people read a paragraph about what is the life cycle of a jelly, since it's kind of a strange thing, we created this 3D moving different stages of jellies that the user would have to then drag into the life cycle and find out if they got right. So this is really early on, sort of pseudo game design, interactive design for learning. But there was also this relationship between the earth and the sea that you could understand through watching meters and testing out things. So that immersive feeling of don't just tell me, let me figure it out myself, really interests me in terms of what we can do with the interactive medium. I did a number of pieces for the Boston BSO for the online conservatory, which was the same thing. People could read a one-page thing about what was the concert they were going to go see, or they could go online and mess around a little bit. And it was perfect because of the auditory nature of understanding that you really need to have with music, that you could actually hear the notes and sort of mess around either before or after the concert. Or in this case, even compose like Cage, where each of those colors represented a particular sound, which you could drag in into the numeric sequences and hear the different rhythm and choices, and you could play multiple loops at the same time. Again, some of these were out there, some were prototypes. So this idea of working in academia means we're often doing prototypes, so critical making to sort of see, will this fly? Is this valuable? So this was a quick game prototype around learning about corn to ethanol and plant biology processes. And what was interesting, again, on this frame reference is they came and just said, well, we need some game on renewable biofuels. And we thought, well, who's it for? 13 to 17-year-olds. Okay, well, how can we make it a more rich ecosystem and change the frame? Open it up so that it was about creative, so that all the students wanted to be musicians. What did music and voting, because it was near an election year, have to do with plant biology? So weaving all those things together was the challenge and also the joy. Now, getting enough money to make that happen, I'll come back to that on another project in a sec. Also work on a number of other projects still concurrently with some professional projects I work on. But again, this ability to work with middle school students and figure out how could they use their personal data, so that individual data, and understand that they're not choosing where they live and how to get to school typically, their parents did. But how could we engage them in a way that they would, in a classroom, learn about environmental science, also through personal data gathering that they would bring into a game setting. So again, it was a whole ecosystem. The game is a tiny little thing down at the bottom. And what interests me is more the whole system that sits around it, where they could be able to visualize what-if scenarios if they did change. And it may lead, so these are some screen captures from the game. And we worked closely with the middle school students, where we were in the classroom working with paper prototypes to try to understand what would be valid for them. And a lot of it was about customization and authoring. They don't want to play some closed-end system, especially at that age group. It's very social. So getting enough money to deliver on this, that's my next step. So it engaged, they brought in their data, and then they also could do things, action items back out in the physical world, like go present at their local city government and get more points for the game that way. So it was a broader ecosystem of actions. This is an image that I've made quite some time ago for another instance, but I've still always reflected on it because it is about that framing, about someone's defined one frame, but I, as the designer, might come in and shift frames, and then I watch some other people, ask some other questions, and invite other people in and evolve it. So I realized, oh, this was kind of missing a lot of steps, and so I've added a few, that really that research place, the collaboration, the making, and especially the failure is a big part of what design is about. So I think a lot of my more recent work has been around failure, and how do we iterate, and how do we embrace failure, and how do we learn from it, even really small pieces of failure. So in some ways, a lot of design criticism would prefer to sort of skip that over. I guess we can look at the federal government healthcare website as, what are we learning from that? And I was reading a little bit about the company and trying to figure that out today. But has anyone actually, I guess you guys are under the 26 and under, so you don't have to go and try to apply. Has anyone gone to it, though, and tried to investigate? No? I'm going to go to a different failure, but I think that's something that's going to be spoken about as a case study for a long time in the future. And maybe, hopefully we'll get to a positive resolution, but still, how these things were allowed to happen is always of interest. So the one thing I've done a little bit of research on is systems that were already designed to accept change. So those shouldn't fail because we're already ready for change. When I would design signs for hospitals, before you even got the signs, I said the minute you got the signs in the building and people moved in, all you had to do was watch failure because people stuck things on them, people put other signs up, you just realize, oh. And so I think the more we've moved into thinking of signage as an iterative system, that's fine. You could start with nothing and just have people put their signs up, like the path. They pick the path and then you follow behind them, deciding what they need. So, this sense of failure isn't something to be always looked at sadly. This is one of my absolute favorite signs in terms of really trying to understand how hard people go at trying to use these systems. So this sign was one of those ones where you could change your store hours and wipe it off. You could see they kind of wiped it off at some point because it wiped off some of the black. And then once that didn't work, they got those little stick-on address gold diamonds, which I still want to find out who designed those. I do not know. And they stuck those on. Then they whited out over them, wrote some other things by hand, and then finally, in exasperation, I assume, went to the store and got the other stick-on things. To me, this is something this is what we need to look for in software, too, because it's not just happening in the physical world, where people just reuse things in new ways. I think that's always fascinating. So this one, they just turn the whole thing over, like, forget that. That's not working for us, that structure. Or when people find workarounds. There's many evidences of workarounds where people try to work with the system, it just doesn't quite do it. Or sometimes they just give up. It just really isn't working. And we really need to understand how we can design systems that could be easier to maintain. So this is my U.S. post office, hard at work. With someone really had a problem. I don't know if it's still up. I should walk over and see it near Porter Square. And then I think there's many, many narratives and stories when you look at failure. So this is one where this is not failure, it's just they're creative. They have lots of contingencies around what they need. So we often say, well, let's wall that off. That's a corner case. But it's in those extreme users that sometimes the solutions exist. And again, I think special cases. We spend a lot of time on software design talking about all the things people are going to do, and then the things they did do, and how could they possibly have decided that's what they were supposed to do. And it's very humbling often, because people in general will go to the one thing that doesn't work. In this case, I could spend all my holidays going around and looking for the poignant stories of people's problems with their hours, especially if it's a complicated holiday. You get long stories. Participation, engaging participation. How am I doing on time, George? Not so good, probably. 10 more minutes or so. Engaging participation is another part of working with human behavior and interactivity. And this is another failure where I worked with a group of students. We created this really dynamic identity about adding your voice. It had all these different components, and it could get recombined lots of ways. And we had ballot boxes where people could put surveys in, and we realized none of this mattered one bit in some ways. When we stood out there with the little surveys with some candy, that's how we got most of the responses we ended up getting. So we didn't really need all this surface design. It's really thinking about where people are and what motivates them. So that was, in some ways, a very interesting failure. Thinking really small things matter, and stopping and looking closely. So this is a project that I did more with a collaborator, a woman in Thailand who's a designer who is really interested in meditation and design, and I'm the most frenetic person there is, so I like working with people that have contrasts to me. So I'm also very interested in when things shouldn't be there. So this is the computer science building before the MFA was completed, and they kept saying, do you want us to bring out the computer screen, and where are you going to put this installation? I was like, no. So I had 1,000 suction cups that I was able to put up in the window, and to me that is a unit, a modular digital unit. I just wanted there to be a physicality and stop from the digital for a moment. So it was a series of questions where people could answer online, and those were brought out into the physical space, or they could just answer right there on the pieces of paper. And again, it's those small moments and those small observations that I think really matter sometimes. I also think of design as that invisible thing that we do often for you guys as students, where in this case it was in Berlin, it was an exchange on culture, migration, and representation that we brought students from all over the world to participate in designing an exhibit that would go in the University of the Arts in Berlin around the issues of stereotyping. So there were students from Turkey, China, Israel, US, including Utah, because I collaborate with someone there who has a lot of Mormon students. And one of the projects they came up with was a T-shirt that they would wear out into the public spaces in Berlin. And they thought originally it should say, what would you call me behind my back? And we realized people are too PC or too anxious to do that. But if we gave them permission to misbehave, in this case, what would people call me behind my back? People actually did participate and write some things on here. And sometimes it gets a little loaded with some of the things they wrote, and this student in particular from China was very brave compared to his compatriots, but in the end, some things that got written on hurt him a little bit. But this is someone from England who had curly hair, and it was just an interesting way to get participation through a way that people maybe weren't used to. So I'm going to change gears a tiny bit here and talk about the quantified self or small data. So we have a big push in this university as well as in the world at the moment for big data, and sensors are everywhere, gathering our every move. We're constantly marking and using different technologies that will help us understand our data. So that's been going on for a long time, even in the physical world. So this is someone's notebook from in the 40s where they're marking their daily, I don't even know what it is, but this idea of self-marking and self-regulation has been of interest for a long time. It used to just be the dashboards or the ways that it got visualized used to just be available to someone who was obsessive enough to do it themselves, or professionals that might have a dashboard or an executive dashboard. Nicholas Felton is a designer who created these annual reports starting around 2005 about himself and his life. And he's done them, you can go see if you just search for Nicholas Felton, you can go see his reports since 2005. He changes them every year and he studies different things. But he now has an app out there called Datum where you could sign up and it tracks your tweets and other things. We all know, if you have any website, that Google Analytics gives you a dashboard and you can track who's coming and to great granularity. There's many, many apps out there, Mint for checking how you're doing on money, or flowing data, your flowing data for visualizing your tweet feeds. Has anyone here downloaded the new Nike app that tracks your movement, not just your running now, so just movement. So walking over here, I did something good, I suppose. So again, these are somewhat ubiquitous, this self-awareness or the quantified self. We can check our moods, or there's a new one out with the bracelet Jawbone, where you're tracking a lot of your sleep and a lot of other things. So I'm trying to figure out, and I think a lot of people are, how is higher ed going to be impacted by technology? And Blackboard, it isn't. I mean, yes, that's where we're starting, but that's not where we're headed. Obviously, how many people here have signed up for a MOOC or actually followed through? Anyone? For one of the massive open online courses? I signed up, but I didn't follow through quite. So I think the question is going to be, how do we credential some of the online learning? How does that impact the value of the things that you're paying a lot of money from a physical institution to get? If you notice in registration now, if you go to your courses, there's a little column now that says traditional. So to me, that means there's something other than traditional, as in hybrid or online, coming very shortly even to this institution. And some of you, I know in the School of Business and as faculty, we're definitely being pushed to look for that. So how many people here were on Naviance to get here in high school? So there's a whole, trying to find the best fit for you. They're in that market. How many people took Kaplan courses, prep courses at all? Anybody? So there are ways that we're measuring. So this whole idea of test scores and measuring is pretty prevalent. How about CourseOff? Has anyone used CourseOff to schedule their classes here? If you haven't, check it out because it makes it a lot easier. And again, it's someone that I think started at Brown not that long ago, and he only has a certain number of schools on, but I'm not sure how often he's scraping the registrar's database, but if it's up to date, it's a really sweet visual way to see, do those courses I'm signing up for fit actually and not overlap? A visual rather than going to the registrar's my pause or whatever you do in Banner and saying reject, reject, reject until you get it right. So there's just a lot of change going on. Chegg and Boundless are trying to change the way we get textbooks delivered. LinkedIn has already connected all of you guys professionally for your future in theory, but now you've got to pay for the premium account. What do you get for that? These are not my graphics. This is from the online colleges. So there's this one on the which hand is that, left, and other one where they're just trying to understand who's taking online courses, what impact do they have. How many people here have used Khan Academy to learn something? So again, there is really just a lot of disruptive forces right now in education and figuring out where technology meets education. If you go to the ASU Education Innovation Summit, these are just the companies that are displaying there. And most of these are startups. So you can sort of look through, you could go look at each one of these companies and see what are they trying to do. There's a lot of investment money sort of floating around trying to figure out what's going to stick, what's going to make a difference, what's really going to be disruptive in a good way. South by Southwest started as a music festival, and then moved to interaction for a number of years, and the last couple of years has added an education few days. And they have an open panel picking system, so there's 29 pages. This represents about 4 pages of people trying to get their topic covered at a session at South by Southwest to present. And here's another, there is so much going on in the space of education meets technology where people are trying to figure out, like teaching typography through sound, or one of the last ones is acting like a designer. So again, not all of these will make the cut of 100 because it's a combination of people voting online as well as expert panels deciding what makes it. But I think that this kind of activity happening in the last 2 years shows me there's a huge shifts are coming in a lot of ways. So if we go back to that framing of what if, in relation to academia, I'm working on with a startup company where we're trying to put the student in the middle, and it's in the space of pre-health. So there's so few seats to get into U.S. or Canadian medical schools. Is anyone here a pre-health or pre-med student? I mean, it's a really competitive space, and you have to do like what you did in high school, where you have to be super person on every single level. You just have to keep doing it all through high school. Maybe that's why, in some ways, you guys are a self-selecting bunch being at Northeastern, in that you're supposed to be entrepreneurial, you're supposed to be giving back, you're supposed to be local, global, and be an amazing individual. But how do you tell that story then, without all the tests and measures? So can we be non-institution-centric in the way we gather things about yourselves and have network be the main focus rather than test scores? So the American, I can't remember what it is, American Medical Association College Group has a new test out, the MCAT 2015, which is supposed to measure people on a competency level and on a holistic level rather than just how well they did in all the organic chemistry and the tough bio courses. And this company that I'm part of, again, we're in the pre-health space because there's money there, and there's really an opportunity because it's a tough application process, but I think a lot of the things we're working on really apply to a broader audience. So it's about how to have evidence and advice mixed together, but have it be student-centric. So I'm just going to show a couple of these screens pretty quickly. It's the idea of, even from the time they're high school seniors, people are talking to us, and I'm like, well, Naviance is in that space, but explore, prepare, apply, connect, that you could get people supporting you throughout the whole process so that you're making and recording your reflections in a way, I know there's lots of things when you go in co-op where you have to record your reflections, but that you record the detours as well and the failures. So we haven't got that failure piece in there, but I'm convinced a lot of the failures that you guys have are the growing pivot points for your next success. And how do you represent that in a resume? Sometimes you hide those things rather than celebrating them. So here's more the typical, I'm going to measure up in these ways rather than, they have all these skill sets rather than measuring up by how many courses I took. What did I learn? What sticks with me? You still have ways that you need to understand, do I measure up to this school's needs? We're in beta, so we're just testing out a lot of these things. As a designer, it's pretty tough because we have to keep rolling out things that I don't think are perfect. And it's just, well, this iteration, just put something out there, see how it works, fix it later. So I think the idea would be that you would record your courses, not just for the term, like CourseOff does, but for your whole time here and plan ahead, and also record any of the other engagements or activities that you did. And then we do a lot of work, and none of this is more internal, a lot of work trying to figure out, with information design and diagrams, what do we mean? What needs to be connected to what? Who needs to be connected to whom? And what do they need to do with each other? What are those exchange points? So it starts to seem like the federal government website in terms of the complexity at some days, but other ways, if this can become more seamless in terms of the way that you do a co-op or do a shadowing, and especially people in pre-med do a number of shadowing. Do they need to go to a general marketplace, or do they go and they get matched by someone who's an expert? How do we move to mobile? So people are going out on interviews. How do they get to see all the information they stored up and all the contacts around a particular school for the whole day while they're out there at a particular medical school being interviewed? And then how do we move the data from one phase of someone's application to another phase? It seems like, again, it's all that invisible work behind the scenes, not creating these amazing branding programs, but about connecting people to people, people to information. And I think one thing that Google's chief information officer, this was a quote from a video presentation he made where he was talking about failure in software before he was at Google, is you need people who want to work at a high level, so that strategy level, but who can also go all the way down to atoms. And I would say that's really, as designers, I expect every designer I have as freshmen to be obsessed about 6-point type, but if they're not pulling back up and shifting their frame and understanding why are we making this and who is it for, it's not going to succeed even if the letter spacing is perfect. It doesn't matter. So that's all I have. Oh, no, I don't. I have one more thing. Sorry about the sound on that little bit there. I am wanting to let you know that we did change our BFA in design, so most of you guys are not design majors. We have broken it into graphic and information design, interaction design, and experience design concentrations, but we also have minors in each of those areas. So if anyone after this course is really enjoying the idea of how design could fit with your other major, and you're not a senior, talk to me or talk to someone in the art and design department and find out if these minors might work well for you. They're not out there published yet, but they have been approved. So thank you. Can I bring my technology to the conversation?
Of course you can bring technology. Well, I have to have mine so that I can receive the mountains of tweets that will be...
That's why mine's here, too.
Yes. Fantastic. There's a lot of places to start, but why don't we start at an area that intersects all of these folks and I think both of us, and that is the role that sort of interactive design is going to play in the evolution of online education and the directions that education is moving. That there's a clear problem. I'm actually giving a talk in like 2 days on this very subject, but in a way, this whole online education thing is being put forward as an answer before people are clear on which problem they're trying to solve. Do you get that sense? I mean, when in your presentation, you talk a lot about like reframing things and making sure that you understand what problem it is that you're solving. And oftentimes, the people who hire you or collaborate with you think the problem is this. And when you start looking at it, you say, actually, let's get back and solve this problem, and then this one will actually take care of itself. In the work you've done on online education, how do you feel like we're clear on what problem it is we're trying to solve?
I think we oversimplify what that is, and that we, as these experts, are going to put knowledge over by you. And I think that's not, obviously you all know that that's not as simple as it is. It's about a collective group. We learn from you, you learn from each other. We discover things together. So again, I think just like design is a process, education is a process, and it's not a linear process, and it's not one-sided. And I think the kids that we worked with in 6th and 7th grade know that. They know that not from possibly what they're doing in their school, though they had a great science teacher. They were making and experimenting a lot. They had very high expectations for what the system or framework we would make for them would do. And it meant they needed to author for each other. They needed to break the system, be able to test the system. They wanted access to all the information that teacher had given them, but they knew that that wasn't the end of the information, that it was all out there. And I think that challenging each other is the piece that I've seen some of the MOOCs try to do, where the teacher couldn't possibly speak to everyone and critique them, where these groups form. So I think looking to massive MMPGs is one thing where communities work together to do different things in these games. So
okay, just a second.
Yeah.
An MMPG is what?
Massively multiplayer
game.
I probably have the wrong acronym. Sorry.
Okay, am I the only person who didn't know that? I am?
My game
Massive
faculty.
multiplayer game. You all knew that was an acronym for that? Okay.
Okay. How many people spent time on one this morning?
And in other words, that's a video game where there's lots and lots of players. So that's what all of our offspring do.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we both shared that Minecraft was a former obsession of our children. I don't
Yes.
believe it is anymore.
No.
Again, that was a sandbox game where they were creating together, creating things for other people to interact with if they use the red electrical. Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
Yes, there's definitely some. I actually think there's some obsessed Minecraft characters in here. People who have at least at one time in their life been obsessed with Minecraft. Is that correct? No? Who? Okay, well, I don't want to.
Yeah, let's not get into
don't
the whole
have to
list of all the
reveal,
games that
but-
you're spending your time with now, which I'm,
Right.
I'm not a game. And again, we have amazing game design faculty here who can shed more light on it than I.
Right.
But I do think that sense of working virtually as a collaborative group and not an assigned group, but groups that come together for their own needs and fluidly change with exchange and form other groups is more the way I would hope we can use medium for education.
Well, what's interesting is, I think, is that we talk about, online education is one of these things that just kind of explodes onto the scene. Oh my gosh, we all have to be doing this immediately. It's a crisis. and you ask a couple of questions, like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm fine, I'm happy to go ahead and participate in that, but what is the crisis exactly? And what are we, where's the fire? Where should we be aiming the hoses so that we can put the fire out? And it turns out that there's a few different, very distinct fires, it seems to me. One of them is higher education costs too much. We need to find ways, scalable ways, to communicate or engage young people in learning that cost less than paying an expert to talk to them 15 people at a time for a whole semester, for example. That's one thing. And Khan Academy is, it's not a panacea, but for dealing with the issue of distance and access, it's pretty good at solving that problem. If you live in a rural village where there's no education beyond basic arithmetic and you speak English, or maybe you don't even have to speak English, maybe there are other languages options in Khan Academy, probably there are. But then we can solve that problem of distance for you. So cost, distance, but then the real killer, the one that you're clearly most interested in, is learning outcomes. I mean, which ones are most effective? Like when you do museum and exhibit design, what are you doing? You're actually having a really small class on how whales hear, or how hummingbirds, transfer the nectar.
Do you assess at that moment, or do you assess over the fact that was a kernel that got someone interested that they didn't look at for another 2 years? So
right.
Again, I think the space of assessment and how you guys, where it's not only us assessing you, but an open system where even the things we choose to assess against could be offered by the group so that they're valuable. Again, this is all open. I like all doors open, so it's hard to figure out where the edges are going to be. So I spend a lot of time in meetings talking about where are the edges today, where are the edges going to be tomorrow. So because we have to deliver something light, agile now, but we have to know where it's headed. So I don't know how that's going to work in education, but I hope we do it in a more fluid way than just turning a switch and saying, okay, 20% of your classes have to be online.
Right.
It works better for some things. Maybe it should be a plug-and-play module that you can use certain weeks and not other weeks.
Right.
But then distance becomes an issue. So I know some classes I've seen where they have local groups. So they'll do a massive virtual system, but then they'll say anyone who's in Chicago is going to meet up on Saturday. Anyone who's in, who knows, Pune, India is going to meet up on Wednesday.
Right.
And so that they're finding more creative ways to be hybrid other than we all have to be here in person Monday and Wednesday, and Friday we will just be virtual.
This is super interesting because, of course, I guess the thing that our president, President Aoun, has pointed out more than once about this change in the context, which is the context of higher education, is its fragmentation. That exactly as you were alluding to earlier, said explicitly, talked about the difference between teaching, research, evaluation, and then credentialization. And that all those things, all those steps in the higher education process have traditionally all taken place within one enterprise called the university. Well, what happens when, California has just, I believe, passed a law that accepts online credits at the whole UC system. I'm sure there's a lot of caveats and limitations, but once that nose is in that door, so in other words, I go to Berkeley. By the way, I did my French requirement at the Alliance Française online website, and I did my math through Khan Academy. That a lot of people are talking simply about outcomes-based testing right away. In other words, we already do it at the university to some extent, right? I think if you want to take an upper-level language class, you take a language exam to see that you are proficient in order to be able to do that. But I think that we're rapidly moving towards a kind of outcomes-based, enterprise where it doesn't matter whether you took graphic design at Yale or architecture at Harvard or whatever. What matters is, show me what you know. In other words, bringing it more in alignment, frankly, with the non-academic world.
I mean, I think I have never taught freshmen before, I'm admitting, until this term. And so it's been a learning experience for me. But what I was trying to understand is, what do people come in with day one? Because I've always been on the shoulder of all the people that came before me in the program, which was excellent. I could already assume that some knowledge was shared, skills were shared.
Right.
Now I'm trying to figure out, okay, why is it that this person over here makes things like this, and this person over here can't do that, but they can ask better questions for this instance than this person who could make something? So I think that contrast of being able to be in a room with people, I guess I'm worried that we're going to credential people past getting to stay in a place where they can collectively understand that we all have strengths and weaknesses, and they can help each other learn. So maybe that's me sort of cheating and thinking I don't have to be the teacher for everything. But I really think that's a much more resonating, engaging way to learn, is to be working in a group and realize, oh, I don't write as well as that person. Let me see how he did that. What was the method that person visualized this thing so effortlessly when it seems like glue and I don't even get it, to me. And so I'm a little bit worried that we, again, I think that is true in K through 12, is that people have to go through these the narrow fire hose in terms of how we perform, and that's how we're judged, and that's how people get here. So maybe even the other part, in terms of what higher ed is doing now, is it's keeping people with different intelligences, in alternate paths, because they don't measure up. So I want to appreciate all the hard work and the diligence that you guys did to get here. We don't want to undermine that. But how do we find ways that you can excel at what you do and then grow the other pieces of yourself?
Let's suffice to say that we would prefer if the early experiments in online do not resemble the store hours fail that you liked, so that you showed, which I loved so much, which had the 7 layers, the palimpsest of different hours. That in other words, that it will be maybe flexible enough to understand that it doesn't know all the problems that it's trying to take on, and try to maybe solve 1 or 2 of them, leaving space to solve more of them as we get more feedback. We haven't done a single online course.
Who will, in architecture, you mean?
Yeah. This might be the first one, actually. This course is the likeliest one to go online with these exchanges as the kind of, sort of, let's say, the lecture component. And then, but then, of course, there's a whole course to be constructed about teasing out how the 8 words that we use as the sort of touch points in the course, how they manifest themselves in a digital interface.
Well, even if you looked at I think you're doing the experience mapping assignment again. Is that
Yeah, we did it. They already did an experience mapping.
So it'd be just interesting to even pick that one apart if you were going to do it online. How will you be able to judge if someone is putting an experience and they're in Texas, in a place that you as the instructor have never been, and you wouldn't know if they're really going into depth and observing the way that you would expect, but maybe someone else in the class has done that. So I'm usually using other people in the class to say, okay, has anyone done Call of Duty? Because this guy's going to do Call of Duty mapping of a system, and I was just like, I'm not going to spend my time playing Call of Duty this week, so I better have at least 2 other people in the room, and yet luckily I did, who can critique and push and prod whether or not, and assess whether this person is going to do a good job of mapping some feedback systems in Call of Duty. And again, I think we have to be I think as designers, we're comfortable with things being ambiguous and being risk-taking and not having the right answer, not knowing if it totally worked. But I'm not sure a lot of the rest of the pre-health space, for example, is comfortable with that.
Well, it's one of the things we've talked about, I think, maybe not enough in this class, but certainly in the beginning of my opening lecture trying to frame this topic. That's one of the things that distinguishes designers from other inhabitants of the academic universe most clearly, is our comfort with there not being a single right answer. And that's not to say that anything goes, far from it, but it is to say that you don't get the certainty, that knowing what 5 + 4 is, provides. You have to just kind of wade into the waters towards a general direction. And hope that you're getting pretty close.
I think that the whole thing of what is where we put value in society too is going to determine whether these things make a difference. So is it about getting a job? Is it about having a successful career? Is it about having impact in terms of money making or social impact? And is it this week or is it 3 years from now? And I don't know how we're going to measure those things.
Well, that's, by the way, that's a great point, because even though we, in this era of, and I want to migrate maybe a little bit towards the sort of big data conversation, but as we have access, everybody's super aware of the prevalence of big data, and we see it in the NSA stuff that's coming out that they know, between, well, of course the NSA doesn't know half what Google knows about us, right? Like the ads that Google sends me are so spot on, it's a little bit scary.
And Nike knows where I'm moving
Nike knows that we're having this conversation right now, right?
Because I let them. I said fine, because I wanted to see.
Right. But the things we measure are going to end up obviously being critically important. The fact that we have access to reams of data is interesting, but now, unfortunately, there's still an enormous amount of work to be done to figure out what things are actually prescriptive. And when it comes to, especially outcomes for young people in higher education, is it, do you survey people the day they graduate, actually halfway through their undergraduate time, 5 years out, 15 years out? I mean, obviously, answer all of those. Then what kind of questions do you ask at those different times? And is the objective maximizing income? Is it, leading a genuinely, interesting and creative life? I suspect the answers to those questions vary dramatically depending on what time in your life you're being asked them. When you're awash in student loan debt, I imagine that you get one answer. And a little bit later, when some of the people who've made some commercial job choices but are deeply and profoundly unhappy, you answer it slightly differently. But figuring out what kinds of questions to ask seems to me to be, what kind of questions it's sort of designed to in this education space just broadens what a complicated and interesting issue it is. And it makes me think that as innovative and game-changing as MOOCs may be, they're like 1 out of 1,000 things that we might be able to do. And the panel I'm on, or the presentation I have to give in a couple days is, it's called Who's Afraid of MOOCs? It's at the Boston Society of Architects annual conference. And, my response is going to be all about, well, it depends. I mean, it depends what question you're hoping that they're going to solve for you, and that what we really need is a clearer taxonomy about what those problems are. But let's get back to, you showed, I loved the context that your talk provided. The issue about reframing things is maybe another way of saying, revisiting the context as the Eames do in Powers of 10, or maybe has to do with questioning the question, which is something we talked about explicitly. We tried to foreground a little bit in this course. You started as a straight-up graphic designer. Yes. Is that fair enough to say? Yes. In your design career? How quickly did you start to migrate into interactive, start thinking about design as a system, or maybe you say maybe you thought about it as a system from the start?
Yeah, I might have, because even when I was a freshman, I still remember this one exhibit I designed. And again, I don't know how I got to designing an exhibit as a freshman, but it was all about sensory perception. It might be from my brother, and it was like the edge where you couldn't hear anything more, and the edge where you couldn't see anything more, and how it was this very experiential exhibit, and had a horrible designed logo, I must say. It was not that well done. But I still think the concept of that experience is what drove me. And then working for an architecture firm as my first job, clearly everything, and sign systems, it has the word system built into it, that felt like a good fit, because as soon as you realized, where do I have to put that sign where people will see it, and being very humble that maybe the architect doesn't want it there, so I'm going to have to put it over there, and then realizing that no one's going to look at that sign, they're going to walk up and ask the person. So it's just like a whole series of deflation. And also, working for architects, we weren't designers the architects were the designers. So that was a whole nother realization of another system that I hadn't realized. So I feel like it's probably deep in who I am, and that I really think of design as a very analytical pursuit. It's about emotions and analytical mixed together. And that questioning is part of that analytical. So you have on those tests where you've got the 4 red cars and the blue car and the 14 days to move them to the parking lot across the way, those kind of problems have always appealed to me.
Right.
But I do think the field as a whole has shifted more that way, definitely in the last 10 years.
Right.
So, working in the environmental graphic design area, that has always been about human behavior and about failure early on. But I think people who worked in an area where they felt they were controlling everything in terms of negotiating with a printer and negotiating with a budget and photographers to get a book, there's conventions they were building on that the book has a cover, has a table of contents, has pages and chapters. There was things that were certain. But my favorite thing was to bring an old book that people would, these software development people would always send me these horrible books, and I always bring it to the first day of class and say, what ways can you interact with the book? And once you realize it can be, those creativity assignments, it can be a doorstop, and then making someone rip a page out of that was very disturbing for a lot of people. But to me, as soon as I realized people can read the back first, they can rip pages out of it, they can never read it, I don't have any more control over those people than I did when they walked into the exhibit, didn't read my intro panel, walked all the way over to that thing in the corner, did it all backwards from the way I thought they should do it, and then read the panel maybe halfway on the way out. That's, again, very humbling. You're like, okay, I have to make an open system, and I have to trust that the end user is completing the other half of it.
Right. Wayfinding is something that I suspect few of the people who are in this class will look at. When you go to an airport next, or when you go to a large, or hospital, or any sort of large institution, and you look at the signage system. I've been traveling a lot lately, and it seems like that's all I'm doing. But some of them are just so well done and figured out. Here's a really, this is a little bit of an aside, but it's so interesting. When you're in a parking garage, now that's a tough place for wayfinding. It's easier for pedestrians once you're out of your car, because it's usually a dark, gray, concrete space, right? Concrete floor, concrete ceiling, the cheapest kind of lighting that will provide the maximum amount of light for the lowest cost. There are a few objectives. One is to get you out of the garage to, let's say, the correct airport terminal. And when for example, at Logan Airport, they have the central parking, giant, big parking structure. When they first built it, there was no wayfinding for pedestrians. It was like you had been dropped in just a giant concrete box, and you had to claw your way out with luggage and hope that you would eventually get to an airplane.
And usually you've been turned around a lot as you go up, and you really have no idea where you are, or you have no mental model anymore of where you were, where you're headed, and what the possibilities are. And there's also
and no access to the sun, by the way, and no access to any context. It's just concrete everywhere.
And then also there's the gaming of it says level closed, but I'm going on that level anyway. So there's a whole changeable thing about human behavior there. That's not meant for me. I'm special. I'm heading over there, and
or I'm in a hurry. Perhaps these other people are probably not in a hurry. I'm actually in a hurry. I need to make my plane, unlike the other people at the airport.
So I mean, again, the whole locative technology has changed the way we navigate out in the physical world, where the signals actually work in ways that probably don't need a lot of signs anymore, or they just confirm things. They're secondary to, what Siri's telling you. But I do think that inside buildings still, especially large, complicated buildings, we still do rely on watching other people, asking people, and then if we have to, looking at those signs.
Right.
And architects are usually thinking, and rightly so in some cases, that the building suggests where you should flow anyway, so we don't need all those pesky little signs.
Well, we're getting into the healthcare world in the School of Architecture some now, and when we're talking with innovators in that space, of course, lots of people are interested in healthcare now, since it's 20% of the economy and it's being completely revamped. So, there's a lot of interesting design going on in all aspects of it. But one area that we're looking at is actually creating a common language for the design of hospitals, the way there is for airports. When you think about both of those two things, they're incredibly complex. They don't get built all at once usually, but they get built in layers at periods of different styles, and you know, so that it's like your store hours problem. You know, we have this brutalist thing, and now we want to put this international style thing next to it, and so forth. But because airports have a kind of logic to how they operate, there's a kind of common language to how you move through them.
Yes.
Whereas in hospitals, it's not true at all. And they really get added on to and changed all the time. And you know, as a result, hospitals are way more confusing than airports.
Definitely, and the procedures aren't organized in the order that you would enact them. They're organized by departmental resources and who knows what.
That's exactly it.
And they change constantly. So that's the other real hard thing to do. The equipment that was huge and behemoth last week is now out of there, and something else is what we're doing for everybody. So I think it's going to be an ongoing challenge, and it's about service. So service design is really the focus of a lot of the work outside of architecture in the design space of healthcare, is really, again, connecting with the end user, being aware of all the things that are on their mind and their needs, and trying to deliver an experience that is useful to them. And you know, so it's similar to being stuck on an airplane maybe sometimes, where they put you in little rooms where you don't have a clue. And there's some privacy issues there, but I think a lot of it is about moving people, not unlike the Disney rides where they would have something to distract you from the fact you were in line.
Right.
So they put you in some exhibit experience while you're on the line to get to the next line to get to the real experience. So I feel like hospital's version of that is to put you in an empty white room with no contact whatsoever, so that you can wonder if it's going to be 17 hours or 2. You have no idea.
And with your 3-year-old copy of Time magazine.
Oh, I didn't even get anything. Nope. Just
Well,
got my kid and no materials.
I see. Well, you know, in some ways, this interface between the sort of digital realm of interactive design and the larger physical world, there's probably a lot to learn in both directions. Like, I personally love the now common parlance abbreviations, UI and UX, user interface and user experience. Because, you know, okay, you got to know that we had Scott Llewellyn of Grindr, the app. He was fantastic, by the way. But also a really clear explainer of the connection between a problem, a technology, and a solution. Really good. But you know, he was super self-conscious and foregrounded the user interface, user experience question. Like, okay, this would work. This would. We have to make the user experience what our target users want and need. You know, thinking about the analog world in that way as one of user experience that is malleable and transformable is really the direction I suspect that the design of the built environment is much more explicitly going in now. You know, which is interesting. In other words, we use examples from the analog world to inform the digital world as it was getting formed, but now that it's kind of taken some shape, it's now providing metaphors and models and guides for the analog world.
Yeah, and I think when we use UI, UX, a lot of times people do mean it within the device, just that experience I'm having here. But I think when we put experience design up there as a major or concentration now and as a minor, we are definitely seeing it in that broader arc. This is just one piece of a broader experience. So you really have to think about the goals, health, happiness, whatever people's goals are. And the screen and that exchange is going away in some ways, the textual screen, except for where, you know, information still needs to be displayed, but if we're talking about gestural interfaces, sensors, and voice-activated things, that is this broader experience. But even one level up from that is the intent someone walks into a hospital with.
Well, or walks into Blackman Auditorium, and they're here because they enrolled in a course on understanding design that seems to engage them like at a level of approximately 50%. And that seems like a fail for me. In other words, like I need to make, as we keep iterating this course, I need to look at it from a user interface. There's a UI for this course. It's this, and it's Blackboard. And Blackboard kind of sucks. I mean, it's pretty terrible. And I've mentioned to every one of our information designers that we've had, both this semester and the previous one, that if they're looking for a problem to solve, Blackboard is the problem that needs solving.
They fixed the login page so it looks more
welcoming.
you
know, I know. So it has less stuff on it, so you know where to go. But
it's kind of like Google now. You just once you get in though.
Yeah, did you notice how they gave everything rounded edges and soft colors, as though what was painful was the sharp edges and the bright colors?
I've never used it because, I mean, I tried once and I just use WordPress or something that I can control, except for the grading part. I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. So I've been trying to use it this year, and I'm one with it now, but it took me a lot, and I will forget it totally later, and I'm going to hit my head against it. But now I know all the, visually I have a mental map of where I got to go to do what I want to do, but it was not.
But wouldn't you love to have a team of crack information designers just take on that project and make it like an Apple interface?
Yes, but I think it's going to be a collaboration with a lot of programmers too, and hugely end users and teachers. And what do we need? It's back to that much broader discussion about how do we deliver value. So I think assessment, open assessment, transparency, you guys judging each other. So first of all, can I rail on architecture for a while?
Sure.
This is a great room for sitting there and being passive, but if you're going to do a more than 50% class, I think you got to think of another room, or reuse this room differently. Turn the chairs around. We need those cars, the trains where the chairs turn around.
It's very interesting you would say that. If I were going to evaluate this class and this room and our deliverables right now, I would say, well, this room is great for for the presentations and for the videos that get made, because this is like a fantastic environment for making good videos, so making good digital outcome. The problem is it's a room that seats 700 people, and I think or more, at least 700. And there's 170 students in the class. So we have guaranteed, this is I'm suffering from what might best be called the Mitt Romney problem. If you recall, during the 2012 race, he had what he thought was going to be a giant event in Detroit, and they had it at the football stadium, but there were only 1,200 people, so it looked like there was nobody there. If he'd had it in a room for 500, they'd have been overflowing and jamming in. It's a context issue.
And again, I think it's back to what are the objectives and the goals for the class. How participatory do you want it to be? I mean, we're struggling with, I think, I've got to make these complex systems where people will know how they're judged, and then I can't even keep up with them sometimes. 10 points for this. I liked yours. 20, 20, 20, 20.
Yeah, it's a Richard Saul Wurman. It's a Richard Saul Wurman kind of situation. 555. That's, by the way, 555. By the way, that's the panel I'm on tomorrow.
Oh, excellent.
I've got one every week, every day this week. So your work in the healthcare area, why don't you tell us a little bit about to the extent that you can or want to.
It's, again, based on a connection that I'd already had, someone I'd worked with who is Dean of Pre-Health. And so I, in some ways, wish it was in the healthcare, because that, to me, is a better audience. And this is, do I really care about the few people that want to become doctors, and how can, is that serving a good audience? But
this is because you're anti-doctor, right?
No, I just worry about impact.
It's a joke.
I don't get jokes. Maybe that's why I was still making that exhibit about sensory understanding.
No, I know that you're on the record as not being anti-doctor.
No, but I am worried about asking, again, are we working at the right level of framing? So should we be wondering about why is it that only 2,800 freshmen can come here, and why is it that only this small number of people can be doctors, and it's because of the teaching hospitals, and it's because the government only funds blah, 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 and what about the people in North Dakota who can't get a general care physician, and how much it costs, and why people go to the specialties, So should I be asking all those questions instead of making a place where students can gather their experiences? maybe,
Right.
but I guess the thing that I enjoy is that problem was put in front of me. That problem has some money, and I've done many, many prototypes in this university where getting that next round of funding is a killer. So this model would be, okay, let's try it in the startup space where there is external funding and there is money to be made potentially. And if it means that that's how I can get it, be able to innovate in the space of education meets technology for a broader audience in the end, and have a voice. You talked about leadership. I was really happy to see that added to your words this year, about how we as designers can be not brought in 3 steps later, and if I still get emails, could you just critify it? That's not what I think design is. So I feel like every day I'm spending time trying to figure out how can I help people understand the value that we bring to the table in terms of strategy and asking those questions and reframing things. And it steps on other people's toes really fast when I realize, oh, people in engineering and computer science and people in business that I work with have a lot of valid things to say about what I'm designing too, so I better sit back a little bit and let it, I need to make more space at the table for design, but I also need to sit back and listen a lot better. So I was on a meeting right before I came here where someone was saying, well, I know we're not supposed to talk about UI, I think because I jumped down their neck a little bit when they said something before. I was like, no, that's not what I meant. Let's just get the intent first, then worry about how we create the interface to help people achieve that intent.
Well, if there's anything I hope that students get out of this class, it's precisely that learning of the importance of being clear about what problem you're trying to solve just cannot be overstated. And you see so many examples of things where the design process started way before there was any clarity on that, or maybe there never was any clarity on that, and you end up with these crazy products or crazy systems or crazy institutions that don't address the matter at hand.
Yeah, and sometimes institutions or organizations are framed around the people that were in the room, not what the end users needed.
Correct.
And I see that happening here a lot of times. We make groupings based on things that they're at the wrong level of questioning.
Right. Let me just check our, no, I just want to check our, and see if we're extremely high-tech in this class, Anna?
I'm hearing more rustling. So
Oh, that's it. That's just natural, completely natural rustling. It's exactly the standard level of rustling that we're used to.
It's 60-some degrees out there.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's...
That's not the rustling?
That's not the rustling. Here we go. Okay, so here we go. All right, here we have...
Should I have prepared questions for
No,
you?
no. Okay, now here's one. What is the overall process that you follow when you attempt to design a new product or service? In other words, if you're just, if you've just been, now I know that you like to be there, what we were just talking about is that you like to be there at the genesis of the enterprise, but you still get hired as a designer in a more traditional sense sometimes, is that right?
Yes.
So how does that, how do you, this is a question I intended to ask as well. How do you get started in that process? These folks are not designers, they're getting exposed to lots of designers in this course, but I assume you want to ask the client lots of questions at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think, again, I'm a little bit removed now from money, but money is usually part of it in terms of scope. Not every client says, I have endless amount of money, just tell me what I need to spend in order to achieve this goal. So usually money can change the scope of what you do. But if I leave that off the table, because at this point working in a university and working in a startup, sometimes you can sort of say, first of all, let's try to figure out what we're trying to achieve and what are we going to do today. So I'm really in the space of iteration a lot. Let's determine who the end users are the right people in the room. So I spend a lot of time trying to get the right people into the meetings. So in other words, if we have meetings and one key deciding person is not there, we might as well be talking to ourselves. Asking all those questions as best I can to understand what the goals are, what the goals of the client are, what the goals of the end user are, how they fit in the many, many systems that sit around whatever artifact or service we're going to deliver. Because it's not just that service, it's that service compared to the other service and the other competitors and the other service. So if you guys are in business, a lot of what we do is very much related to this. If you're in engineering, a lot of what we do every single day is very much related to what you do. But we use different words for it. So that's a big part is communication. What do you mean by you want a this? What do you mean by that? So I probably feel like some days, 90% of my time realizing we didn't both mean the same thing by that one word, and it makes me a little bit crazy. But then I think the next step is, as designers, especially as visual designers, we have the ability to leave the room and visualize relationships about what we just heard. So I would much rather than write a proposal, which is the way I used to have to practice a lot more. Let me write that proposal up and make everything plug and play. So I know you're not going to have that much money, so let me put every service I can think of as an add-on right over here, and if you pick which ones you want, and we'll make this happen. But I think in the space of not worrying about that, it's figuring out what are we going to do first? What are we going to deliver in this time frame? So time is a big part of it too. And I am a firm believer in I work with someone who recently was explaining to me that I couldn't be creative if I knew everything else that everyone else was doing. My understanding would be clouded by that, and I couldn't make anything innovative. And I think just the opposite. I need to know absolutely everything that's out there. I need to build on conventions. I need to understand what's possible, what's innovative, and then figure out where we sit in that. So that ability to visualize all those systems and relationships is really the core of what I'm trying to teach in this freshman course, which I'm failing at in a lot of ways because they don't have some of the skills I already wish they had in terms of composition. But that ability to think and take what we heard and put it back in front of everybody, is this what we agree to? That is a real power that visual designers have.
It's an ongoing struggle. By the way, if anybody has any questions that they want to ask at the mic, you can head up now. But it's an ongoing struggle, I think, for all of us who teach design between the kind of, the aesthetic pole of it, composition. I mean, when I was in architecture school, and probably when you were in design school, we were at a period of unbelievable focus on composition at the expense of everything else. I mean, people they imagine what they want about what people learn in architecture school. When I was in architecture school, I learned almost nothing but how to make things look beautiful by the standards of the day. Not building technology, not energy performance, not user comfort, none of that. 0% that, 100% is other things. Now we live in a time of tremendously different metrics. Performance, broadly described, whether it's energy performance in buildings or sales performance on websites or educational outcomes performance on interactive applications. We're much more in a sort of traditional understanding of design as a responsive, engaged, communicative enterprise, as opposed to as a heroic individual accomplishment, which is, how a whole generation of architects was trained.
So it seems like then, I sort of left out that sense of how will we know if we're successful. So maybe that
metrics,
not just in education, but in working for a client, for defined audiences. Once we complete this process, and we're going to, again, because I only work in the space which nothing is ever done, we're going to iterate on it. How will we know what should have happened or what could have happened, or did the things 60% of the things we did were successful?
Right.
And I don't think there's a big dialogue in design between Google's version of we'll just get metrics on all that, we'll get data on all that, versus intuition. And where does that space of it doesn't feel right? No, we're going to do the blue one, not that one. And they do A/B testing all the time. More people clicked on the blue one. So I learned that early on in exhibit design. They would do these paper prototypes of things I designed, and I could think, I don't understand what they're testing because it's not going to look like that or feel like that. Yet they would have people touching. And I see the value of it now, but as a young designer, I kept thinking, I think this is just paying all those assessment people, pre-assessment people to figure out I don't know what. And again, it was much more in the education space, but they would have a lot of things that they did.
Well, I think that goes with the natural uncertainty or lack of comfort that most people have with making something that hasn't been made before. In architecture, in real estate, in lots of things, people are always wanting to know comps. What should I be comparing this to? If you're selling your house, what did the house down the street that's like yours sell for? Okay, now I'm comfortable with what you're saying I should ask for it. But in the world of making new things, their anxiety has to be assuaged in some other way, whether it is questionable, construction assessment.
With friends only? I mean,
Yeah, with people
you know.
who don't represent the user group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Anne, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and thank you all.
Thank you.